just don't know what really causes this phenomenon. So this has been going on for a very long time, but every time it happens, the scientists come up with a new far-fetched explanation for it. We just don't know what really causes this phenomenon. And that's what the witnesses are always describing, incredible as it is.
Welcome to Don't Turn Around, a podcast about the extraordinary and the unexplained and the often profound impact these events have on our lives. This is a place for amazing stories and contemplations as they relate to the paranormal. If you've had an experience and you'd like to share it, feel free to reach out to me at dtapodcastinfo@gmail.com. Don't Turn Around would not be possible without our incredible community. And thank you to everyone that's gone out to Apple Podcasts and left a glowing review and a rating. Those help get the show out to more ears. If you're so inclined to join Patreon, support helps over there as well. And you already, if you're a member, you know about the exclusives. And if not, well, swing over to the page and there you're going to find, of course, unedited content from investigations, my short fiction, long fiction, and everything in between. But that's enough of that rambling. Today's guest is a paranormal researcher, social media influencer, and author. She is the founder of the Association of Paranormal Study and runs The Spooky Stuff, a fantastic website with a ton of great content that you should really swing by and check out. If it's weird, spooky, unusual, scary, macabre, or haunted, she wants to write and talk about it. Currently, she has hundreds of thousands of followers on TikTok, and those numbers are only going to grow because her content is just spot on. She's been seen on Discovery Plus's series Haunted Hospitals in episode 12 titled It Followed Me Home, and on Travel Channel's Most Terrifying Places in America. She hosts the podcast The Spooky Stuff, and is the author of several books, including The Women of the Paranormal, Volume 1, A Brief History, The Hamptonville Hauntings, One Bed Over, A Hospital Haunting, The Brave Mortal's Guide to Ghost Hunting, and more. She has been featured on KPBS San Diego, Fox News, and The Washington Post for her various endeavors. Alex Matsuo, welcome so much to Don't Turn Around.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So we are neighbors, which is delightful. I've had the opportunity to spend some time with you, but I don't know that we've had the opportunity to really sit down and talk at length. And I know that you've got some really neat stuff coming up. So I figured, well, what a great opportunity for me to get to know you, for my listeners to get to know you, and just sit back and have a great discussion. So thank you for joining. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. And yeah, we really are neighbors, which, it's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah, stone's throw. Actually, Arlington was my stomping grounds back in my early 20s. I lived down in the courthouse area of Arlington back when I was a rock and roller and played down at all the clubs there in DC when I was a younger, more spry man.
Nice. You're still young and spry. What are you talking about?
See, that's how you get points. That's how you get invited back to the show.
Noted.
So with first-time guests, I always like to start at the beginning with the origin story. And I understand it's never really it's not often one event that propels us into our interest in the paranormal, but it's this amalgamation of different things that we experience and different things we are exposed to that leads to where we are today. And so I want to hear that. I want to hear your story. Where did this begin?
Yeah. So the earliest experience that I remember happened when I was about 7 or 8 years old. Grew up in San Diego, California. So I was a California kid, but my grandmother was originally from Appalachian, Kentucky. So lived in the tri-state area. You go across one bridge, it's Ohio. Go across the other bridge, it's West Virginia. Maybe 40, 45 minutes from Point Pleasant. So So
Okay.
that's where
Yeah.
I spent a lot of my summers between, California and Kentucky. And it was a dark and stormy night, of course. And it was, and keep in mind, I'm a California kid, so I don't see good rainstorms in San Diego. Um, and so I was looking outside watching the storm, and I saw this hooded figure outside of the house, of my
Okay.
mama's house. And I'm like, okay, that's weird. And it kept creeping closer and closer to the house. Every time I would shut the curtain and open the curtain, it was closer. And then finally I had this moment where I ran into bed, put the covers over my head because, that's what you do when something scary is happening. And, and also knowing in Appalachia, like, I didn't even realize this was like Appalachian folklore, but it's like you keep the curtains closed at night and you don't open them. I just thought that was just what we did. Like, that was
That's just
it.
good practice.
It's good practice, but no, it was it's actually tied to folklore. And I'm like, when I realized like most of my childhood in Kentucky was Appalachian folklore in real time, it was a real use case. I was like, oh, I didn't even think this was I didn't even think anything of it. Yeah, so I was in the bed putting the covers over my head, and the mattress that I slept on, I shared a bed with my mama when we came to visit. It didn't sink when you sat in it; it tipped. So, like, whenever I got into bed, I had to make sure you're kind of center so that you don't tip yourself and slide off the bed. But when my mama would come to bed, the bed would obviously tip, but she would stop me from falling off the bed. So I got into bed, put the covers over my head. The bed started to tip, and I'm thinking, oh, thank God Mama's here.
Right.
But I slid off the bed, completely slid off the bed. And I looked up, and the bed just went right back to its spot after about a second, just went, meh, meh, just a little thing. And I'm like, okay, what the hell? But also, oh, that's really cool. So that was kind of the starting incident. And I got really interested in like ghost stories. I'm a millennial, born in the mid to late 80s. So I had Goosebumps,
Of course.
Are You Afraid of the Dark, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Loved all of that. However, my mother was very conservative Christian, like Christian fundamentalism, like super Christian. Did not allow this stuff in the house. Granted, we lived under my grandmother's roof, the Appalachian Kentucky grandma.
Right.
And she was like, I don't care. Like, so a lot of times I actually hung out in my grandma's bedroom to read the books and, watch Are You Afraid of the Dark? And she didn't care. She would fall asleep in the bed and I'm just watching TV and living my best life.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was heavily discouraged. And then when I was old enough to drive, I did have a couple of other experiences growing up too, especially being a theater kid.
Yeah.
I saw a ballerina in the theater who disappeared right in front of me right before my show was about to start. Yeah.
That must have some impact on the pre-show jitters.
I know, right? Right.
Talk about being thrown off.
It's so funny because people will try to debunk it like, well, maybe it was one of your cast members. And it's like, you spend so much time with your cast leading up to the show.
Yeah.
Like, you know everything about them, like, by the time the show opens. So it's like, if I saw one of my castmates stretching on the balcony, I would know it was them. And plus, it was 5 minutes to curtain. Ballerina was not in costume for the show. And in theater, that's like, what the heck are you doing? Get into costume before the stage manager kicks your butt,
Right.
It's like, y'all, like, it's one of those, not to be cliche, but it's like, I know what I saw, but also it's like everything you're trying to say to debunk this is not going to work, especially if you haven't worked in theater. It's like 5 minutes before curtain, you're in your costume and you're probably on your way to places, not in a leotard and pink tights and ballet
Probably
shoes,
not.
stretching on the railing and then disappearing.
Probably
not. So,
nor vanishing into thin air.
Right.
That's
too.
unlikely as well.
That too. I would like to learn that trick if anyone does know how to do that.
There are so many social situations where I could use that trick and just be like, uh-oh, and I'm gone.
Exactly. Disappearing like Thanos just did the snap,
yes.
know? Yeah, so I had little experiences like that where it was like 10 seconds of a moment, but just enough to pique my interest and keep it. After I learned how to drive, I lived about 5-ish minutes away from Old Town San Diego, where the infamous Whaley House is.
Okay. Yeah.
So I did a lot of late night because, in high school, you're teenagers. I did a lot of middle of the night visits to the Whaley House in the courtyard, which does have its very spooky ookiness to it. El Campo Santo Cemetery. Those were my stomping grounds. And then I did have that one really disturbing experience after my car accident on New Year's Eve.
Yep.
That One Bed Over is based on, and the Haunted Hospitals episode is based on. That switched my perspective of the paranormal from, oh yeah, this is a fun thing to explore, and it is a fun thing. Don't get me wrong, but my experiences up to that point had not been at least traumatic. Still, maybe a little scary, but not like traumatic. And
Right.
the haunted hospitals incident was definitely traumatic. And really, what was what really pivoted the change in perspective too was this was 2006. The paranormal community today did not exist in 2006. You were lucky if you could at least find like maybe a random psychic medium in the yellow pages that wasn't
right.
That wasn't a scammer, or just did tarot readings.
Right.
My grandma had passed by this point, so it was just me and my mom. Of course, my mom's solution was go to the church. Church would not touch this with a 10-foot pole. And this was a Southern Baptist church too, like a legit member of the Southern Baptist Convention. This was a legit Southern Baptist church. They would not touch this with a 10-foot pole. So we ended up getting help from the Greek Orthodox Church, which they were actually really cool. But we didn't have any investigators, like paranormal investigators on this case at all, or parapsychologists at all.
And if we could back up, and I do want people to go watch this episode that's based on this story, but if you could get a little bit more into what was going on, what was going on?
Yeah, so I was in a really, really bad accident on the night of New Year's Eve. Long story short, I hydroplaned on the freeway ramp, got out of the car to get my stuff. Another car came and hit me, knocked me over the guardrail, fell 25 feet onto the road below. Had to go to the hospital, shockingly enough.
God, that was smart choice.
It warranted an ambulance trip. So on the night my accident happened, 1, it was in San Diego. 2, it was raining. So San Diegans in the rain, present company included at the time, not a good combination. So hospitals were absolutely full to the brim.
I bet.
Like they couldn't even and it was New Year's Eve, so they couldn't even send me to the closest hospital because they were already full. Like everybody was getting into an accident that night. So they sent me to another hospital, and I was sharing a trauma room with another individual. It was a man. He was in much worse shape than I was in. My injuries were mainly internal. I had broken bones and a lot of internal bleeding, internal organ damage. I could physically see the blood on him, and it was dripping on the floor. And I could hear him screaming next to me. And one of the nurses, she did her best, but she saw me looking at the guy as they were working on me, and she just put like this frosted divider between us. Yeah, I could still see all the red and everything. Yeah. So it's like, you tried. But the big thing with my injuries were my blood pressure was so low that they could not give me any pain medication.
Wow.
And I had broken bones. So when they were moving me, it was an excruciating amount of pain. I mean, just touching me was an excruciating amount of pain. And I don't know if maybe my soul was just like, that's it, I'm out, but I had what I believe was an out of body experience. I was floating above my body. I could also walk around the lobby and I could see my mom with all my friends. A part of me did consider like that I had died because I'm like, oh, this is everybody I care about in this lobby.
Yeah.
I did find out later that after the ambulance took me away, my mom called all my friends and told them what happened, and they all came to the hospital.
Of course.
So, which does imply that maybe I did see something more out of the ordinary, like I saw something that was accurate. So I was at the foot of the bed watching the doctors work on me, and then I realized that there was somebody standing at the foot of the bed next to me where this bloody man was laying and screaming. He was also wearing a lot of leather, which indicated to me motorcycle rider. The guy standing at the foot of the bed also had leather on, we locked eyes. I felt like I was going down a roller coaster. And when I opened my eyes, it was after midnight and the candy striper was wiping all the blood off my face. And the guy next to me was gone, except for the puddles of blood on the floor that they were mopping up, which
Right.
again is great to see when you're coming back into consciousness after a
Yeah.
devastating accident, by the way.
Yeah.
And literally, like, stuff started to happen that night. I had to have an MRI and a CAT scan done because internal
Right.
injuries,
Of course.
got to get a full scope of what was happening. They wanted
Yeah.
to stop the internal bleeding first before assessing the broken bones. So I was in my room trying to process everything. I mean, I was 19 years old at the time. Basically thinking my life was over
Yeah.
because I didn't know what the future held. And I'm sitting in bed with a catheter, it's
Yeah.
like because I can't walk. And I started seeing shadows in my room. When the California Highway Patrol came to interview me about the accident, I actually saw this man in leather, the man in the leather jacket, as I called him, yelling at the cops because they were basically rolling down my compression socks to see the bruises on my leg to
Okay.
make a case that I got hit
Yeah.
by the car.
Yeah. Of course.
And they didn't ask my consent, by the way. They just started doing it.
Yeah.
Again, early 2000s, consent was a foreign
Right.
concept a little bit.
That's a whole other discussion.
That's a whole other discussion. But yeah. So like the man in the leather jacket started yelling at them, saying, "Get out." And I'm 19 years old at the time. I'm super naive. Even with like my ghost like trotting and everything, I was like, oh, maybe this guy is coming to say hi and checking on me. So I'm like, oh, maybe this guy is just saying hi. And then he,
Well, of course, your brain's going to go to what is the most logical, accessible explanation for what's going on, not really having much else in the index to query, right? So that makes perfect sense.
Yep. So, and also I was considering the time I was on a lot of morphine. I had the button. Yeah. Great device. Which that's what I was using to rationalize like seeing him as a shadow too. I'm like, well, maybe that was like the morphine, like messing with my head. But it wasn't until my mom noticed something weird was happening, and plus finding out again, how much HIPAA was a thing back in 2006, or how much it was adhered. But I did ask. I said, "What happened to the guy in the trauma room next to me?" And then I found out he died. And I'm like, "Oh, okay." It wasn't until I had the surgery on my hip to basically put me back together that things really started to take a turn for like towards the negative. Like I would see him and he would say, "Why you, not me? Why did you live? Why did I die?" And I had to switch hospitals about midway throughout my stay in recovery because I was in the hospital for a hot minute.
I bet.
And after I switched hospitals, things were calm for a couple days, but then he reappeared again. And all this to say, he ended up sticking around for about 8 months. So, and as I got better, the activity got worse. So, which considering that he died and he was resentful that he died and I lived, it made sense that as I was going back to normalcy, it was starting to create more anger.
Yeah. Wow. I just need to sit with that for a moment. That's a lot. For, I mean, just the accident alone and the trauma of that, not just the physical, but certainly, that is a big T, and that is a big T in the book of trauma, and not to mention you're only 19, right? So, your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed yet. That doesn't happen until we're 25, and so that impacts how we process trauma, not just in the moment, but in the time after we start processing and figuring out what does this all mean to my life. Just the in this reality accident event, but then you're adding in this visitor, this person you shared a trauma room with, which that alone, more trauma. And then now there's, well, we can only, I will go out on a limb saying is a resentful spirit that, yeah, I can understand that. But let's face it, when we have the living in our lives and we're managing those relationships and we have resentfulness between people and we're trying to figure out how to manage that, that's a challenge in and of itself. But now you have this unexplainable phenomena happening with real human emotions, but everything else that it is paranormal must have been, I mean, for lack of a better description, really, really hard to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
And 8 months is a long time. 8 months is a long time.
It is. And there have been times I was trying to rationalize and debunk this too, as like, well, maybe this is just me projecting, like processing the trauma of the accident. Right. But the fact that my mom saw it too, or not saw it, but she felt it and heard it. She never saw him, but she definitely saw like him moving stuff. Like objects were moving. The feelings of it too, like just the negative feelings that he brought with him. I did have a couple friends who lived with me during that time too, and they sensed something really off. And yeah, I mean, he would follow me even when like my friends would take me out. My friends were real rock stars during this whole time. Like they came over once a week for a movie night, really making sure that I felt included. They would kidnap me once a week. They would take my wheelchair and we'd go to the beach, or they'd take me to school, and I would see him wherever we went. And I did try to rationalize. I'm like, well, maybe this is me like processing things, but again, other people experienced it too. So it was very much this, like, I didn't know how to deal with it. And, we did get intervention from the Greek Orthodox Church, but I felt like that more so put a muzzle on him.
Right.
I don't think it didn't resolve it because I still felt he was around and extremely angry. And it's the most unexciting conclusion ever to such a dramatic case. But really, at the end of the day, what finally resolved it was me empathizing with him and saying, like, just taking one night to kind of meditate and say, like, I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry you did not get a chance to continue your life, but this cannot keep going. This cannot go on because I'm going to drive you crazy. You're going to drive me crazy. You need to move on. Like, you need to go someplace else. And that actually was what ultimately ended up resolving it.
Yeah.
So, and again, and the Haunted Hospitals episode kind of indicates that the Greek Orthodox Church intervention was what resolved it, which I know at the end of the day, they need entertainment, and I would say 95, they were 95% accurate with the rest of it. So they did really well.
That's pretty good. For some of the stuff that's on television is 95% that's pretty good. But
that's pretty good. Well, and I was preparing for the worst. Like I was preparing for like them adding devil horns to the man in the leather jacket. I mean, I was prepared for like they were totally going to do what they were going to do, but that's actually why I wrote One Bed Over, so that the whole story could be told, because I knew people were going to have questions. And even in that book, I have a whole chapter on where I debunk myself, basically, or at least I try to theorize, like, if this wasn't a ghost or a spirit attachment, then what else could it have been? And it's like, but either way, even from a parapsychology standpoint, it's a fascinating case because even if it was me processing trauma, it's like, okay, well, somehow my psyche managed to make everything on the walls fall down. Like I was able to do some pretty cool things if that's the case,
Right. Like Jean Grey level things, right?
Yeah, exactly.
For the comic book nerds out there. That is, I mean, I felt a very emotional response hearing this story. And I have a few follow-up questions before we move on to other stuff. In terms of even after resolution, right? And I'll talk about that to segue into my next topic here. But in terms of processing all that, that's going to have an impact on your mental health. That is very stressful. It is just, I can't even really begin to comprehend. I can certainly empathize with you on this, but not having really experienced something like that, I don't know. I've had my
Mhm.
own stuff to deal with, and I've dealt with it through therapy and being artistic and various outlets, and in the time after that, how did you move forward once it was resolved? And I'm sure there were phases, because I'm sure once it was initially resolved, were you just waiting for it to happen again?
Oh, absolutely. There was a lot of times I was questioning myself of like if something got knocked over in the middle of the night, or if my cat randomly hissed at something, I'm like, "Oh my god, he's back."
Yeah.
Um, I think between that and after the accident, and this is connected to the man in the leather jacket. After the accident, and this lasts for years, but and I still deal with it, is the survivor's guilt. It's the
Yes.
survivor's guilt, especially when people who mean well, they mean well, but they're like, oh, you survived because God has a plan for you,
Yeah.
or the universe saved you for a reason.
Hmm.
And then it's like, okay, I'm sitting here in my corporate job, working behind a screen all day,
Yeah.
and then going home and binging on TV at the end of the evening. Am I actually, is this the plan that the universe has for me? Like,
Right.
was this the reason why I survived? Like, or should I be going out there and running for president? Or,
Right.
you know, um, so it really makes you like question your survival sometimes. It's like, am I like, it's almost like there's this weird standard that we place on ourselves. Of like, am I doing good enough to have deserved to have survived
Yeah.
this incident? And
Yes.
and
Yes.
I didn't really come to terms with that until I was writing One Bed Over, which was almost like 15 years later. Writing the book was honestly a very healing part of me, because telling the story on haunted hospitals actually re-triggered my PTSD.
Hmm.
Um, I sat in the chair.
Yeah.
The production staff at haunted hospitals, they were wonderful. Like, they were really great. They were really patient with me. But I sat in that chair for about 4 hours telling this story, and I hadn't really talked about it before with people. I mean, I talked about it with maybe one or two people,
Yeah.
and of course my mom knew, but I didn't actually talk about it, like sit down and talk about it with other people, let alone from a public mindset. Like, it was very much a not necessarily a reluctant thing. It was
Hmm.
more of like, okay, I'm actually telling the story now, and then as I'm telling it, I'm realizing as I'm sitting in the chair, I'm like, oh, I don't think I dealt with this properly.
No,
It's like, I didn't go to therapy. I did not go to therapy after this. Like, I should have gone to therapy.
yeah,
Like,
and
what the
you
heck?
are re-experiencing these events
Hmm.
without a safety net.
Yep.
Therapy provides us that safety net.
Hmm.
It's like being in a boxing ring with your trauma, and your therapist is your coach, and if they need to end the round early, they're going to throw that towel in, and then we can fight
Yep.
another day, but not really for you. I mean, I'm sure the production staff was very well intentioned, but probably not mental health professionals. So that was hard. Okay.
Yeah. Well, what was wild was that as I was telling the story, and even when I tell the story today, like, I didn't really cry. Like, I didn't cry.
Hmm.
But when
Hmm.
I talked about but when I talked about the candy striper wiping the blood off of my face, that's what made me cry.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
just and it was just explaining that like, that was the first moment of peace I had had since the accident happened.
Yes.
And I don't know,
Yes.
it triggered
Yes.
something in me where I just started boo-hooing. And luckily, they didn't use that B-roll at all, because I was worried that they were gonna use that B-roll for maybe something else in the story.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was just like just talking about, like, the kindness in this man's eyes as he was wiping the blood off of my
Yeah.
face, and, like, it was after midnight when I came to, and he wished me a happy new year, and it was just
Oh,
like, I don't
wow.
know, like, I'm sitting in the chair, like, bawling my eyes out,
Yeah.
and it's like, but it wasn't like I wasn't talking about anything dramatic. It was just a very simple, quiet moment after all the chaos happened.
Yes.
Um,
And that's a
so
beautiful, beautiful concept
yeah.
right there. And you were a minute ago talking about survivor's guilt and about purpose, and y- I can relate to that, not in such an extreme sense, but for whatever reason with the universe, I've had a number of people very close to me, several over the last 10 years, 2 or 3 in the last 2 or 3 years, just die unexpectedly or get a diagnosis and gone in a year. And I've been trying to process, well, these great people, how are they, how's that it for them? And how do some of us, how am I still going? Do I have this purpose that, that are we all kind of search for? And when you're talking about that candy striper, I think it brings up a really good point that maybe we have this purpose or something important to do in life as ordained by the universe or whatever power we subscribe to. And it can be as simple as a moment of a candy striper wiping someone's, face and wishing them a happy new year. I mean, it could be some finite moment like that that has a profound impact that ripples outward. It might happen in between episodes of watching Expedition X or or one of our shows that all of us in the community love, but we just don't know. And I think that's where faith comes in. Faith is a word I really like, and I don't feel like faith needs to be tied to religion, I think, at all, right? I think it's just have faith. Faith gives us strength and will and purpose and comfort. So in moving forward from filming the episode and trying to unpack the lot all at once, what did you do with that? Then after everything's unpacked, after the first time, probably, as you mentioned, really ever, how do you move forward?
Yeah. So after I unpacked all of that, and the timing was also very, not necessarily inconvenient, but I had just had weight loss surgery like a month ago.
Yep.
And we were also in the midst of the pandemic, like the beginnings of the pandemic. So I couldn't fly to Atlanta. So basically I was living in Raleigh at the time. So I had to drive to Atlanta. So I couldn't eat my feelings, like, cause I had just had surgery. I couldn't eat my feelings, which was so inconvenient.
As a feelings eater, I can see how that might have been a little frustrating.
Oh yeah. So basically I just kind of cried all the way back to Raleigh. I was just in the car and just like, because I had to stop every couple hours anyway, because I had just had the surgery, and you don't want to be sitting for too long because of circulation. So I just kind of took those moments to take a walk and process. But it was also that realization of like, dang, I really need to start seeing a therapist. So I definitely looked into some sort of therapy. I also looked into support groups for people who had survived accidents, and that actually ended up being really helpful. There was actually a lot of military vets in the group too, especially those who survived combat.
I bet.
But yeah, so that whole, I mean, I knew I had, well, and the other thing was, in order to get the weight loss surgery, I had to have a psychiatric evaluation. And the psychiatrist, I did get an official diagnosis of PTSD, and she was like, well, what do you think could be attributed to it? And I just briefly mentioned the accident, like very broad overview, didn't dive deep. And she was like, you're really, and that was the other thing that kind of ended up rocking my world too. It's like, you're really well adjusted, or you're doing really well with that. And I'm like, looking back, I'm like, am I? Oh yeah, I was in a car accident. Oh yeah, that could be. Yeah. And then finally I started seeing a therapist after the Haunted Hospitals filming. And it was like, oh wow, there was a lot I did not process or think about it, because I've always been a go person. I know you've known this since you've met me too. Like after I was able to walk again, I was back at school. I was back to doing shows. I was go all over again. So I didn't give myself the time to really pause and like, okay, let's talk about the accident, especially with like how it happened and the dynamic of how it affected my relationship with my mother. Because my mother was not no one's parents perfect, but my
Right.
mother had a lot that she needed to process that she did not process well.
Yeah.
And took it out on me, especially with having to move back into the house, and
Yeah.
she had to take some
Yeah.
some break from work and that whole thing. So it's like, okay, this affected a lot of people. Um, and just trying to navigate all the feelings and all the dynamics around that. And I realized when I started therapy that it's like, okay, I didn't fully like just take time to process or think about it. And I still talk about the accident with one of I have a couple therapists that I
Yeah.
see just kind of on rotation
Yeah.
and depending on what I need at the time. And the
Yep.
accident comes up a lot.
I
And
bet.
yeah, because it happened, you like you mentioned it. I mean, I was 19 when it happened. I spent my 20th birthday in the hospital. It was,
Yeah.
uh, I saw the end of my teenage years in a sterile white room with a window and
Yeah.
surrounded by flowers and get well cards,
Yeah. Yeah. That's remarkable. I mean, and that's the thing with trauma. We don't, trauma doesn't go away, right?
Mm-mm.
We can heal, right? We can heal that collateral damage of the trauma, and we can learn to carry the trauma, and we can learn where it fits, in our lives and in our journey. But it doesn't go away. But that's okay. And sometimes it pops up in those moments we are triggered when we least expect it. And I think that's why it's so important to have one self-awareness, to just a good support team. And wow, that's a lot. And I'm sorry you had to deal with so much, so much. But you are yeah, it's inspirational to hear your story and see where you are with it today.
Thank you.
In regards to trauma, you have a video on your YouTube channel that I think is a very important message for people investigating, people interested in the paranormal, even casually. It is about trauma, but it's about investigating in places where there has been trauma, or the spirits or the non-living may have had trauma in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Was that particular video in part inspired by your experience with a traumatic spirit in your life for so long?
Yeah, actually, yeah. So it was actually when I was telling my story on haunted hospitals, but then after the haunted hospitals episode went out, and the book came out, I got a lot of requests for interviews.
Yeah.
And basically, I found myself telling the story over and over and over again, almost on a daily basis. And like I said, like retelling the story in the studio kind of reactivated my PTSD a bit. And then having to tell the story over and over and over again really was starting to I was starting to get the nightmares. The nightmares are coming back. I was getting like the shakes,
Yeah.
that I was getting shaky and cold, like going through shock. So the
Yeah.
flashbacks, I was starting to have PTSD incidences again. And I don't know, like I was just kind of sitting there I was talking to a friend about it. And I don't know, like the light bulb came on and I thought, holy cow, some of these haunted locations get people coming in almost daily too and asking them about their trauma. Like, how did you die?
Yeah.
What was it like to live in a tuberculosis hospital? Or what
Right.
was it like to be in an asylum? Or, why were you here? And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, like, holy cow, we're kind of asking spirits to do the same thing. I can't deal with it. And I've only been doing this for a month, or 2 months.
For sure.
And so, yeah, that's kind of what led to the light bulb moment of like, oh my gosh, we are basically walking in the door and asking these spirits to share their most traumatic events or the worst days of their lives. And I think it's very telling how a lot of times most of us get activity, like especially EVPs, when we're doing side conversations with our teammates talking about pizza. And that's when like we
Yes.
get the interjections. And I'm like, maybe they don't want to have those deep conversations. Maybe they just want to talk like, hey, what's your favorite food? Hey, I really liked my grandma's biscuits. Like
Yeah.
maybe they just want to have those conversations. And I know for me, like not saying that I'm hoping I don't end up haunting like the bridge I fell off of. I don't think I would, but
Right.
I could definitely see how my story could be pivoted to on a dark and stormy night in 2005 on New Year's Eve. This person fell off the bridge and blah blah blah. I could totally see like how my trauma and my story could get switched to fit a narrative. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I just want to say thank you for revisiting that and being so candid and open, because I know, as you mentioned, it's not easy to talk about, but I think it's the whole arc of that story through up to the investigation and how we handle our investigations and these locations with respect and empathy is a
hmm
very important message, hugely important message to get out there. And I love that point too. It's sometimes we're having our side conversations, or as you know, T and I can get a little silly, a little punchy, slap
hmm
happy with each other. And we'll have some voices come in like over our conversations. I'm like, man, I wish we weren't talking then, because that would have been a perfect EVP. But that seems to be, in my experience, and I'll ask you to reiterate as well of your experience, but we tend to get more activity and more responses when we are not directly like, you died on this battlefield, what was that like? Rather
Right.
than being like, what, oh, it must have been really, really hot that day fighting out there. I can't imagine what that would have been like. Even just showing that empathy through your line of questioning, but not necessarily directly going after those issues, but just trying to like relate, has been very fortuitous in terms of the responses we get, the evidence we
hmm
collect. And have you experienced the same things on your investigations, going in with more of a human approach?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we've always tried to have a more humane approach to
Hmm.
investigating. I mean, because there was some programming on TV that did have a more of a focus on, hey, let's have some empathy instead of just invoking like the name of Jesus Christ and demanding a spirit to show themselves.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so but we've really started to go in hard on it in the last, I want to say, 4 or 5 years. Um, and a lot of that is just because we got better responses when we were more empathetic
Hmm.
to the spirits. And a couple years ago, we were on the battleship North Carolina. We were doing
Hmm.
the Estes method,
Hmm.
and I was under. And then my two male investigators, who are also queer, they were talking. And what I was spouting out was like word salad on my end. I had no idea what they
Right.
were
Of course.
saying. But then when they pulled me out of the Estes, they were both in tears. And then it turned out that they had believed to have made contact with a queer sailor on the battleship.
Yeah.
And they had this beautiful conversation with him because he was struggling to understand, like, wait, you are gay and you're married now? And like, wait, what is this? Like, he was
Right.
trying really hard to understand. And then my investigators were thanking him, like, well, thank you for living your truth and existing, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have been able to marry the man that I love today. And it's
Yeah.
like, it's like,
Wow.
oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Um,
Cue the
ex-
waterworks.
exactly. So, and I use that audio in my presentation because I do a
Hmm.
presentation on the utilization of trauma and paranormal investigating and how you can
Hmm.
pivot that into more empathetic conversations.
Yeah.
But I play that audio as an example of, like, this is an example of a really beautiful conversation between two investigators in the spirit who had common ground,
Yeah.
and using that common ground to amplify that spirit's experience and also give them like a bridge of understanding, and also like, hey, we're going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, which I think was very healing for both parties, not just the spirit, but also for my
Yeah.
investigators.
Yeah.
So I think, and how we create those bridges of connection is, we also, when we introduce ourselves, we also try to say a little bit about ourselves, like who we are. Like,
Hmm.
I live in Arlington, I'm married, I have cats, um, sometimes I get the crazy cat lady spirits coming through, and I'm like, hey, high five.
Yeah.
My sister,
Yeah.
it's like, hey, you know, um, or we get the cat spirits at,
Yeah.
Linville.
Oh
I'm like,
yeah. Shadow.
yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
We've
When I
we've
found out
had.
about Shadow, I'm like, here, kitty, 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 kitty. I'm like, come here, baby. you
Yeah,
know,
I feel like we've
um,
all had some experience up there with Shadow, either brushing up against our leg or cat
mhm,
balls. It's yeah, cat
yeah.
spirits. I'm good with
So
that.
I'm totally fine with that. But yeah, so we try to say a little bit about ourselves and who we are, tell our own stories. Uh, Whenever I'm at the Trevette Clinic, there's a spirit there. The doctor's wife, she was an opera singer when she was alive, but
Hmm.
couldn't fulfill those opera singing dreams because she
Yeah,
got married and had to go home to North Carolina to
yeah,
be with her in-laws. I can relate to that as someone who
yeah,
studied theater and had Broadway dreams. I'm not on
yeah,
Broadway now.
yeah,
So I told her my story of like, I love singing too. And one of my other team members sings opera. So whenever we go to the Trevette Clinic, he sings for her. And we get really cool
I love that.
responses from that. Yeah. So just finding like bridges of understanding, those connectors, and really leaning into them with empathy and sensitivity as much as possible. And that helps build trust and rapport with the spirits. Like I'm a big proponent or a big promoter of don't just go to a place once. If you can if you can afford it and it's feasible, go to a location several times and build that rapport. I saw that with T
Yeah,
and Pip at
yeah,
Linville Manor. Like the
yes,
rapport is there.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I heard my name and Tina's name even came up over
yep,
some of the devices,
yep, yep.
and that rapport it's a beautiful thing, and it's if you have the opportunity to do that, to have a location like that available, definitely capitalize it. And I really feel to the approach that you're speaking about, you walk away with a lot more as an investigator. Not just data, but perspective, and it's very meaningful.
Hmm.
And rather than just pursuing the thrills, because it can be thrilling, and there are some moments where there is a certain thrill involved,
Oh
and those
yeah,
are brilliant and wonderful. But that's just one layer of just a very intricate interplay between our energy and the energy of these locations. And you mentioned that you do this in some of you. This is one of your talks, and I know you're the founder of. And I'm going to just so I make sure I don't get it wrong, the Association of Paranormal Study,
hmm,
and you have a big event coming up here. So it should be just about a week from the airing of this episode in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, one of
yes,
my favorite spots to go visit. Uh, what's happening in Gettysburg? Break it down.
yeah, yeah. So I've always had this big dream of putting on a paranormal conference.
Hmm.
And I am with my team. We're putting on the Paranormal Research Symposium on August 17th in Gettysburg. And what started off as a Facebook post just saying, hey, if I booked a conference room for the day, would anyone like to present their research and their
Yeah,
theories and talk about it? And we just eat some food and hang out.
which sounds
It's
awesome.
which is awesome. But then it ballooned into Ghostly Images of Gettysburg and
Yep.
Ghost City Tours reaching out saying, hey, you can use our buildings for free. We would love to partner with you and support this cause, like
Yeah.
support this initiative. And I'm like, oh, okay. So now in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, in 3 different buildings, there will be presentations, panels, and workshops happening starting at 8:30 a.m. until 6 o'clock. So it's a full day of
Love it.
paranormal, spooky stuff happening. Um, there's 30-minute breaks in between each session, so hopefully everyone has time to collaborate and talk with each
Yeah.
other. There's also a lunch break. So, yeah, it's I'm excited. I'm also in that stress mode now because it's like it's coming up soon, and I'm like, oh
It's coming
crap,
up soon, and it's a first, right?
it's a
And
first.
so there's a lot of unknowns, but you know what? Go with the flow. I based on the guests that I see presenting, my boo T Morris being one of them. Another Timothy Renner. I was very excited to see Timothy. He's been on the show before. Actually, he might be coming on as soon as next week to
Oh,
chat
nice.
again. and it looks like it's going to be just a really, really great event full of really, really great vibes. Where can folks grab tickets for this event?
Yeah, so they can go to our website, associationofparanormalstudy.com, and there will be a tab for the Paranormal Research Symposium. And just click on the tab. There will be a link right there to get tickets. If you want a direct link to get tickets, you can contact me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X. And I'll be happy to send you the direct link because we do use a GoPassage page, but it's going to be gopassage.com/5678 equal ? We don't want people to have to deal with that. So,
Right.
Yeah,
That's
so
kind of you.
I can send the direct link as well.
Okay.
But yeah, so so tickets are $50 right now. They will go up to $60 the day of. So you
Okay.
have until midnight on Friday to get your ticket online and save $10. And then we'll be selling tickets the day of at the door as well.
Well, I'll put all that information on the website, and you can expect that I will absolutely be there as well. I am really looking forward to it.
Yay!
But before we wrap up, this is the time of the show where, and I gave you the heads up in the email, but where I ask what I call the don't turn around question. This is a question that can be taken very literally or very figuratively. So I'm just going to jump in and ask the question. Alex, do you turn around?
Oh, hell yeah.
Love it. Love it. Straightforward, to the point, and you've had quite an amazing journey. And so to be able to answer that with such, without hesitation, says a lot about you. And I'm so grateful for you sharing your story here today and joining me on the show. Where can people find overall about all the incredible things that you are doing and that you will continue to do?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, alexmatsuo.com. You can find my YouTube channel, my blog, my socials there. You can also look me up on Facebook at The Spooky Stuff, all one word. You can also look up my name, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads. You can find me there. I try to reply to everyone as much as possible. But I am also working on an event coming up. So if I don't respond right away, unless it's Symposium related, I probably won't reply right away.
Right.
It's like I'm definitely in event mode now, which is fine. It's gonna be good. So yeah.
Well, wonderful. Well, that will all be in the show notes. So thank you again, Alex Matsuo, for being on the show, and I will certainly have you on again sometime in the future.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was a blast. I loved it.
Absolutely. And as far as all of you fantastic listeners and now viewers out there in the Don't Turn Around community, thank you so much for being a part of this incredible community and being there to hear and share these incredible stories. Thanks for listening, viewing. We'll catch you next time.
We just don't know what really causes this phenomenon. So it's been going on for a very long time, but every time it happens, the scientists come up with a new qualified explanation for it. We just don't know what really causes this phenomenon. And that's what the witnesses are always describing, incredible as it is.
Great, I'm in.